What can a former school teacher teach you about productivity? We'll find out today on Keeping You Organized. Well, joining us today on Keeping You Organized is Helene Segura from Living Order San Antonio, or Living Order SA. Helene, welcome to the program today.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Well, let's start about kind of looking at how you got involved with professional organizing, how long you've been doing it, what motivated you to get involved. Kind of give us your backstory on that.
Sure. I started my adult life as a teacher in a Title I school, which means it was very low income, and many of the kids struggled, particularly because they did not have a lot of support at home. So all of the students started off with 100 averages in order to help their self-esteem. But after the first 6 weeks, I noticed all of their grades would downslide, and that was not a good thing. And I soon figured out it wasn't because they were unintelligent, it was because they were not organized. And if organizing is not taught at home, it won't be taught at school because it's not covered on a state exam. So I started my organizing career by teaching my students how to be better organized, how to use a planner. If you share a bedroom with 4 siblings, where can you study, when can you study, and be able to finish all of your homework. So that snowballed into helping other teacher students as well as other teachers, and then that led to my career and what I do today.
Okay, good. So now you're no longer a teacher, now you're a full-time professional organizer.
Correct.
And speaker and author as well. We're going to cover some of that stuff. In fact, you've written one book called Less Stress for Teachers, and obviously you have a really good background for that, but let's talk a little bit about that book and kind of what the premise of it and who it's for.
Sure. As soon as my teacher colleagues found out that I was going into the organizing profession, they said, "Oh my goodness, you need to write a book because you understand what you need to do." And so that required me admitting to a lot of my faults and drawbacks when I first started my career, and getting into some unhealthy habits. So I learned how to pick myself up by my bootstraps and figure out what is the most efficient way to get through a school day and still be a top-notch teacher, make sure all of my kids have the education they need, and also still have a life outside of the classroom. So in Less Stress for Teachers, I talk about all of the lessons that I learned and what I now teach my clients, so that way they can control the 5 main components of a school day. Because if they can do that, there will still be a little bit of stress during the school day because you're working with kiddos, but your stress levels will be so much lower.
What do you think is the most common disorganizational characteristic of a typical teacher? I know everyone's different, but do you see common things over and over?
Yes, and even with the most organized teachers on the planet, the one thing that really hurts all teachers is the amount of disruptions during the school day. So whether you teach kindergarten or you teach high school, there's always a question being asked of you, or there's somebody knocking at your door, or somebody else email or documentation. So it's the amount of disruptions. Second to that would be paper management, because despite the fact that we're supposed to be digital, teachers still have entirely too much paper to deal with.
Right. Well, and they've got to teach people how to write, and still not everything's electronic yet. But and how do you do that? Managing the interruptions and the disruptions, because it's kind of a public place, right? You have to kind of be open and available. What are some of the tactics that you would recommend to a teacher to kind of control some of those interruptions?
The first thing you need to do is decide on your priorities. And once you have your top 3 or 4 priorities straight, you are aware of what disruptions you can allow into your classroom or into your professional and your personal life. Now, as far as before school, a lot of teachers will keep their doors open, which is great. But you don't have to keep your door open for the entire hour and a half before school starts when you're there. So one of the recommendations I make is to set office hours, just like college professors do. So that way you have office hours for yourself where you're uninterrupted, and then you also have office hours for your colleagues and your students. So that way they know what time they can come in and have your full attention, and that way you're concentrating on them and not trying to get back to grading your papers.
Well, and also some of that morning time is probably prime time. It's when you're probably feeling the most energy. and to maybe sit around the break room talking about what you watched on TV last night versus focusing on those real high priority things probably is a good tactic, I would think.
Right. And what I talk about in the book is that the more downtime you have at school, then the more work time you're going to have outside of the school day. So I'm not suggesting that you take 0 breaks during the day, but if you're going to spend an hour before school and an hour after school in the lounge socializing, then that's 2 hours that you've just taken away from school that you'll most likely have to use at home doing your grading and your lesson planning.
Yeah, and probably not a lot of teachers want to spend their time at home doing that as well. How about for the teaching the having the teachers teach the students some of those organizational things? What are some of those things that you would recommend a teacher trying to tell a student?
I recommend that the teacher model what he or she would like the students to do in the beginning of class, throughout the middle of class, and at the end of class. And so this sounds counterintuitive to take teaching time away from the students, but during the first couple of weeks of school or even the first 2 days in a new grading period, you can walk the students through what you suggest their routine should be. So as soon as the bell rings, we're in our seats, what's the first thing that you should take out? So for some teachers, that's a novel. For other teachers, it's a notebook. So you start modeling for the students what they need to have with them, what they need to take out. And then also at the end of class, making sure that you stop your lesson at least 5 minutes before the bell rings, so that way you can review what needs to be turned in, what needs to be completed. Have the students, give them time to write this down in their planners, so that way they're not rushing out the door trying to remember to write it later, and then allow them to pack up and help them pack up. Where's a good place to put this binder so you remember to do your homework? Where is a good place to put this pencil so that way you still have it at the end of the day? And by building that time in at the beginnings of semesters and grading periods, you'll find that you have less lost time throughout the grading semester.
Right, and you're really giving them that, it's kind of like developing a good habit, right? If you take just a few minutes to develop some good habits, you can get those things really in your routine. I don't know, I've heard it say that, you need to do something for 21 days. I don't know who said that or if it's even true or not, but, trying to get those kinds of developmental things. Do you work with teachers right now in your practice? Do you consult with some where they hire you to kind of help them do this?
I'm brought in to work with either departments or campuses. And so I can either work one-on-one with the teachers within a department, or a campus will bring me in to present a workshop for the entire campus. And that's helpful when it's the whole campus, because everybody realizes what advice they're being given, so everybody's on the same page, so they understand, oh, that's why you have your door closed. Oh, that's why you're checking email at such and such a time.
Right. Well, how about some maybe tips for parents at home who maybe whose students are fortunate enough to have a teacher like that helps keep them organized? What about what can some parents do at home just to help keep their students organized?
Sure. The first thing they want to do is go over goals and expectations. A lot of frustrations that arise during the school year is because there's somewhat of a break in communication between parent and child. So a parent wants to encourage their children and say, oh, I want you to do well, I want you to get good grades, you can do it. But what's the definition of good grades? So if I'm a student and I'm terrible at AP Physics, speaking from personal experience, I would think a good grade is a 76, a 77, I passed the class. Whereas a parent might be expecting an 85 or 90. And so that's where some of the communication breaks happen and frustration arises. So you want to set those expectations. The other thing you want to do is talk about schedules ahead of time, so that once again everybody is on the same page. So what time do you need to wake up for school in order to not feel rushed? What time do you need to leave for school? What time should you get picked up from school? And most importantly, what time will you study? Because school activities are very important and you have practices after school, but there has to be a set study time as well, just like you have a set practice time for activities.
Are you a proponent of having like maybe a master calendar in the kitchen or something where people's schedules, if you have more than one kid, can kind of all be together? What do you recommend in that situation?
Either a paper calendar or an electronic calendar, whichever functions best for the family. And I recommend at least one family meeting a week, preferably on a Saturday or Sunday, so that way you can map everything out for the week and make sure nothing's fallen through the cracks.
Great, great. Well, listen, I know there's another passion that you have, which is entrepreneurs and teaching entrepreneurs organization and helping them. We're going to take a real quick break right now. And when we come back, let's talk about that entrepreneur, because sometimes they're kind of wide thinkers and don't have the greatest organizational skills, and how you work with them. So we're talking with Helene Segura from Living Order San Antonio, and we'll be right back on Keeping You Organized. Never lose your stuff again. Introducing the new Stick and Find personal tracking device from Smead. Stick and Find trackers use Bluetooth technology to help you locate your keys, electronics, pets, kids, and more. Using the free Stick and Find radar app and your smartphone, you can locate your stuff up to 150 feet away at the touch of a button. Stick and Find works with many popular iOS smartphones, tablets, and select Android devices. For more information, go to smead.com/SNF or contact your local office supplies reseller. Never lose your stuff again. The Stick and Find Bluetooth location tracker from Smead, keeping you organized. We're back now on Keeping You Organized with Helene Segura from Living Order San Antonio, or livingordersa.com is your website, Helene. And we spent the first part of the interview talking, more about school. And, let's say we've got that great student all prepared. He gets out of school and then he's got that entrepreneurial bug and wants to start a business. And I understand you work with a lot of business owners, especially entrepreneurs. What are some of the common challenges that an entrepreneur really faces?
One of the biggest challenges I find when I work with clients is that they have absolutely fabulous dreams, but they don't plan the steps that they need to take in order to meet those dreams. So what happens is their dream list just keeps on getting longer and longer and longer, and they get more and more frustrated because they can't cross anything off that list. So what I like to do with them is first teach them about priorities, choosing which one of those dreams needs to come true first, and then planning the steps they need to take to get there.
Yeah, because it seems like an entrepreneur, the dreams are usually the easy part, right? It's the execution of them. Can you get a little more granular on how you would take someone from a dream to maybe a specific task, or how do you break it down? How do you go from big to small?
Sure. So I had one client who wanted to have a revenue base of $5 million per year, and this was going to be quite a big jump for her. And that is a fabulous dream. Who doesn't want $5 million in income? But then we started we started working our way backwards, and I said, so how many hours do you have to work in order to make a certain income? How much is your hourly rate? Even though she wasn't quite hourly, we were figuring out her packages. And so what we determined was she would have to work 80 hours per week in order to meet her goal of $5 million. Mm-hmm. So that led to the conversation of perhaps we should readjust your goal to something more realistic, because your sanity is more important than money. She wanted to stay married, she wanted to be a good mother, she wanted to be a successful business owner, but you can't do all of those things if you're working 80 hours per week. So we readjusted her goal.
Okay, good. So then what did you do maybe after? Let's keep on that particular client. You've got kind of a revenue goal. How did you break that into other areas of their organization? Did they have challenges with their office organization too? I mean, did you cover a lot of different areas with them?
We did cover some spatial challenges, but it all boiled down to time. So we figured out which tasks need to be completed in order to have a successful business. Then we looked at which tasks required her brain and her brain only, because that was her gift. And those other tasks that didn't quite require her brain and her functions, then we looked at delegating those so that way she can spend all of her time on doing what she was best at. And so from there we divided out who needs to do which task, and we developed operations manuals so that way if something gets delegated, no matter who it's delegated to, it's done the same way according to her standards, because she's got her operations.
Yeah, and it seems like entrepreneurs have a difficulty delegating, don't they? They kind of want to hold on and do it all, but that's really the most successful ones are the ones who can leverage other people's time and talents to get more done, I guess. right?
Absolutely, yes. And anytime you start your own business, that is your baby. And just like when you send your kids off to school for kindergarten and eventually you send them off to college, you let go a little by little, but you've been shaping them all along so that way they can do the right thing when it's time. And that's the same way when you're delegating. You find the right people to fit your company and your goals, and then you just shape them and mold them so that way they are taking over for you in those particular areas.
That's great. Well, let's talk about your other book, because you have another one called The Roadmap to Get Organized. Tell me a little bit about how that is set up and what it focuses on.
Sure. That book is based on the common denominator that I found amongst all my clients. And if you look at the 5 stages of psychology, my clients were at stage 2, which is acknowledging that you have a challenge, and they were jumping to stage 4, which is taking action. They were skipping stage 3, which is planning, because so many of us get excited, we figure out, oh, that's what my problem is. Now we need to go take care of it. But if we don't plan what that care is, then we can end up being very unsuccessful with the actions. And so what Roadmap to Get Organized is about is stage 3. How do you know what you need to plan for? How do you figure out what you need to do, when your best work time is, and then implement that action?
What are some of the steps in kind of digging through that of step 3? How do you break it down into chunks, I guess?
So we look at the different personalities that are out there, the different brain types and the different learning types, also the different work styles. So we can use work styles as an example. Some people are called marathoners and other people are sprinters. So a marathoner is somebody who can work for hours at a time, maybe 2 hours or possibly 8 or 10. And they have no problem marathoning because they have the physical and the emotional stamina to do that. Whereas a sprinter, for whatever reason, can only work in 15-minute increments. So I'm a sprinter. I can go for 15 minutes solid at a time, and then I need to stop and take a little break. The problem comes in that some sprinters are trying to be marathoners because they heard that somewhere. So when they're trying to do something that they're not built for, they end up being unsuccessful, and then they just throw in the towel. I mean, who wants to keep going if you can't do what you want? So part of it is figuring out what your best work style is, sprinting or marathoning, and setting up your schedules based on that so that way you can have more success.
Are people surprised when they kind of identify what kind of type they are, or do people kind of say, oh, yeah, that's me?
No, it's actually very heartwarming to see the smile come across their face, and they do the old Aggie, what we call an Aggie high five here in Texas. You put your palm against your forehead and you say, oh my gosh, I never realized that. So all along they had some kind of feeling that they're not doing things right, but they just didn't understand why, and it's because we're all built differently, and once they make that realization and apply it, then they're so much more successful with their projects.
Okay, well, on this show, a lot of times I like to ask our guests, how do you practice what you preach? So what are some of your personal productivity tips? Or like, are you you said you were a sprinter, but what are some of the things you use on a daily basis? Do you use a electronic or a paper planner? Do you plan the day out in advance? Do you prioritize? Kind of give us your daily organizational routine for you.
Sure, yes to all of the above. So I do use both a paper planner and an electronic planner. And the reason for that is because I'm what I call a global learner. That means I need to see the big picture in order to do my planning. And a paper planner allows me to do that because I can see what's happening a week before a certain date and a week after and decide how much time I have to allot to a project. As opposed to electronic, I can't see all of that at one time. I can just see little blue dots on my calendar that doesn't tell me anything. Now I use the electronic calendar because other people need to see my schedule, and so it's very convenient that anybody who has access to my calendar can see where I am and schedule my next appointments. So I use a combination of both paper and electronic. And then what I do is at the end of each business day, I make sure that I allow at least 15 minutes, no matter what time it is, to figure out what went right during the day, because I need to keep doing that, and then also what went wrong so that way I can make improvements, and then plan my next day, make sure I have everything prepared for that so I'm not feeling frazzled in the morning.
Right. Well, let's take a look back at this last 7 days, and let's think about maybe a client you worked with and a tip that you gave somebody and maybe what their situation was and how that resolved. Just kind of a current organizational tip that you've implemented in the last, not necessarily for yourself, but for, say, a client in the last 7 days.
Sure. The first one that I can think of is a client who had called me in for time management challenges. And as I was giving her needs assessment in her office, I noticed that she kept on being distracted by something. So I watched where her eyes were going, and they were going over to her computer. She had her email indicator on, which means every time a new email came in, there wasn't a sound, but there was something visual on her screen, and that was taking her attention away from whatever she was doing. So I counted up the number of times that happened and made a guesstimate as far as approximately how much time she lost. Because whenever our focus is taken away from something, even though our eyes may adjust back, our brains have to reshift and reboot, so that takes time. So when I let her know that she had lost about 13 minutes of the hour to having her eyes dart over to the email, she was just absolutely flabbergasted. So it was tough for her to go cold turkey, but I asked her to turn off her email indicator for the rest of the appointment, and she was amazed at how focused she was. So something simple like that is all sometimes a person needs in order to get more focused and more organized.
And that's really incremental change. Do a little bit here, do a little bit here, and you can pursue excellence. I mean, managing the whole thing is always a difficult thing. So, hey, we're out of time here. I want to let people know how they can get a hold of you. Do you do virtual organizing, coaching, and things like that, or do you pretty much go into your local geographic area? How does your business work, and how can people get a hold of you?
I can do virtual organizing either through Skype or through phone coaching, so we'd set up appointments ahead of time. And for out of area, if they want me in person, I've also been flown in or driven in to places other than San Antonio, so it's not a problem for one-to-one or for workshops.
Okay, great. And your website is livingordersa.com. All your contact information is on there, I would imagine?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, great. Well, I would expect that because you're an organized person, so I'm sure it's nicely organized there and easy to find. So, well, Helene, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and hope to have you back on the show again another time to talk even more about organizing and entrepreneurs and all the different things you do. So we'll talk to you again in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Helene Segura from Living Order San Antonio. You can find her at livingordersa.com.